Hello, Paris. I hope you guys have enjoyed the speaker so far. I'm super honored to be up here speaking amongst such a great set of speakers with such an awesome audience. So my name is Vicenti, and I work at Facebook on the open source team. And for the past couple of years, I've been working on React Native and React Native apps at Facebook, and with a pretty big focus in navigation. And this has been a pretty painful thing for a lot of the community. So last year, I was here presenting about, here we go. Last year I was here to present Navigation Experimental, which was a library that we introduced into React Native to replace React Native's original navigator component. And Navigation Experimental uses the new animated library, so it's a lot more customizable and uses a lot faster animations. But Navigation Experimental didn't manage any of your navigation state, so it took quite a bit of boilerplate to use. So since then, we've deprecated Navigator and Navigation Experimental, and we've combined Navigation Experimental's efforts with Expo's X-Navigation project, and now it's React Navigation. Let's get my clicker to work. All right. So today, we're going to tell you a little bit of a story about React Navigation and a team that tried to use it, and to some success. Now, let me tell you about this team. This team is a team of heroes, and they had some swag. But not that kind of swag, actually. This kind of swag. All right. So, and they had a lot of this kind of swag, right? They had a whole truckload. And in this timeline, their compression play just wasn't going super well. So they decided to make a React Native app that would actually allow them to offload some of their swag and buy them some more runway. So this is the app they wanted to make. It's basically a very simple swag checkout experience where you can put in some information and buy some swag from our team of heroes here. Now, they started by running create React Native app, swag. They just want a very simple swag app, right? And at the beginning, they didn't have any navigation at all. They just rendered a horizontal scroll view and rendered the screens inside. Now, for a moment, let's assume that all of these screens have independently connected themselves to something like Relay or MobX or Redux. So here we have a pretty simple UI. It looks OK, but we're going to want to actually have some navigation on this experience, right? We're going to want to be able to go back with the Android back button and deep link into this experience when we want to. So we're going to install React Navigation. And what we're going to want is an interface that looks something like this, with different tabs. Tabs that look relatively standard for each platform. So let's get started. By installing React Navigation, and then instead of rendering all of the views inside of the scroll view, we're going to use a tab navigator from React Navigation and create our app with this tab navigator. Now I'm going to be showing quite a bit of code today, so don't worry, we're actually going to be publishing all of this code online for you to play with later on. So creating the tab navigator is relatively easy because all you have to do is register each screen component as routes within your navigator. And then for each of these screen components, we're going to want to add some navigation options to configure how they're going to be presented in the tab navigator. Right? So we're going to put static navigation options, and we're going to set the label and the icon for each of our screens. Next, we're going to want to be able to navigate from one screen to the next with a button. So inside of our render function, we're going to pull out the navigate off of props.navigation and call it when our button is pressed. And we're going to pass it a route name. So we're going to be going to the shipping screen from the cart. All right, so now we've got a nice tab experience for our app. And some of this stuff is starting to come together, right? The Android back button is working, although the default behavior is to go to the first tab when you hit the Android back button. All right, they actually made a concession in this design. So they decided to switch it up and to make it so that the confirmation screen actually goes over all of the tabs rather than being the fourth tab. So this confirmation screen is going to be like the top item of a stack, right? So we're going to, previously, we had our whole application was just this tab navigator, but we're going to move that to a separate module. And in this separate module, or from our app, we're actually going to be rendering a stack. So we're going to import a stack navigator, And we're going to put this whole other navigator as a single screen inside of our new app stack navigator. And we're also going to add the confirmation screen so that it shows up over it. Plus, we want this modal to open like this and not like this. So we're going to configure this as a modal, right? All right. So let's go ahead and see how it works. All right. Now the confirmation screen comes over the tabs. So now the designers were actually somewhat wishy-washy when it comes to this. So they actually wanted to go back to the scroll view experience and augment that instead of using this tab navigator. So instead of something like this, they wanted an interface that looks like this. You can see it's the same on iOS and Android. And it's got this progress indicator at the bottom. Now, it's not the prettiest design, but this is coming from the same designer who brought us this experience, so let's forget about that for a second. So this navigator that we're using as our tab navigator for the different tabs, it's a little too magical. It's kind of like a higher order component with several different screens. All right, so instead of this super magical higher order component, we're going to want to render our own navigator component. We're going to want to define it ourselves. But we don't quite understand what a navigator component is, so let's take a step back for a second. Let's pretend we are rendering a navigator as if we're an app wrapper. So with React Navigation, you can use any of the navigators in an uncontrolled way. So you basically just render them straight up. And this is what we've been doing so far. And when you just render them like this, they maintain all of their state internally. So actions could be happening. It'll be maintaining the state internally. It'll also handle deep linking and the Android back button behavior. But the way navigators communicate with each other is with a navigation prop. So you can make a navigator a controlled component, just like you can control a text input. So we're going to control our navigator now and provide a state. This tells our navigator what to present. But the navigator sort of requests what it wants its state to be by defining a router. And the router has getStateForAction, which defines the navigation state for our app, right? And it's kind of like a reducer because it takes in an action in a previous state to output the new state. All right, and then we also provide a dispatcher to our app so that it can request changes to the navigation state. So the way we handle an action that gets dispatched is by running it through our getStateForAction function and then setting that new state. All right, so now hopefully you have a rough understanding of what it's like to use a navigator. Now let's go and implement our new navigator. And we're going to put a static router on it. Now, this checkout router, where does this come from? Do I have to go and implement all of my own navigation logic myself now? No. So the router actually has a very similar API to the navigator. So here we're going to be setting up our tab router, and we're going to be registering each of our screens inside of it. And it's still going to have the tab behavior. So we're going to statically put that on our component. And remember, the state is defined by router's getStateForAction. So the navigation state for a tab router looks like this. There are 3 different routes in this case, each representing a tab. And we know that the middle tab is selected because the index is currently 1. All right. So now we're going to render each of these routes inside of our navigator's scroll view, right? So this is how we can implement our own navigation view while reusing the navigation logic. So next, when the index changes of our navigation state, we're going to want to scroll to the correct place in the scroll view. And lastly, we need these tab buttons on the bottom, right? So when you tap one of those, we're going to dispatch a navigation action to navigate to that route. OK. So now we've built a totally custom navigator with totally custom view implementation. It's not super pretty, but it also has all the same behavior that we had before. We didn't have to totally rewrite all of our navigation logic. But it turns out our navigation logic isn't quite perfect, and the designers of our app want to customize it a little bit. There are 2 things sort of wrong with the navigation logic right now. One is that the Android back button should take you to the previous tab. Now, again, don't ask me about their design decisions. But the other thing is the continue button should take you to the next tab. And right now, the continue button just takes you straight to the confirmation step. So how are we going to fix this? Because we're using this router that's kind of wrapping up all of our navigation logic. Maybe we could have a way to customize it. So let's take the default router that the tab router creates, and we're going to extend it. It's going to have all the behavior of the default checkout router, but we're going to override getState for action. And we're going to do a couple special things in this case. So if the action is a back action, and there is an index that you can go back to, if it's not already 0, then we're going to want to return and bail out early and override this behavior by providing a lower index. Likewise, if we're navigating forward, we're going to have a confirmation navigate action. And if we still have more index to go, then we're going to want to increment that index forward and bail out. But otherwise, we just want the default router's behavior. Cool. So now we've customized the navigation logic, and it's behaving exactly how we want it to. And at this point, this app is pretty much ready to put into the App Store and the Play Store as long as they connect those screens. So this is pretty exciting, but our team wanted to take it to the next level. So what they wanted to do is they wanted to ship this existing app as their MVP, while they also worked on a new, totally fresh, totally exciting app that has a better experience. And they wanted to share code between these different experiences, right? So this is what they've got right now, but they want more of a store. They want a swag store. So here, now they can browse between the different pieces of swag and add them to the cart and open the checkout flow that we had previously built. So how are we going to do this? Well, unfortunately, sharing code in the React world is not the easiest thing to do, especially because of the development environments, right? If you think about the web world with Create React App, you can link in external libraries, but you still have to build them independently, right? You can link them in using npm link, Lerna, or link local, but it's still pretty painful because you need to develop for them separately. And things get really broken when it comes to source maps or shared flow types or TypeScript, right? And it's a lot worse in React Native because there's basically no linking support by the React Native packager. So in order to do this, you have to do some pretty crazy hacks. So our team struggled with this for a little while, and they came to two conclusions. One is this is a big problem. This isn't something that a small team is going to be able to fix in a weekend or two, which is what they were trying to do. And second is this is an industry-wide problem. Like, of course, this is a huge problem for the React industry, but it's also a big problem for everyone in JavaScript, because everybody needs to be able to use next-generation JavaScript and compile it down before they ship it to NPM. Plus, everyone wants to be able to develop multiple modules together because they depend on each other and talk to each other. So this can be pretty painful. So they experimented with a workspace feature, and they wanted it to work something like this. They would install something like Create React Workspace, something wild. And they wouldn't want to also install a Create React app and Create React Native app. They would just get this one workspace that wraps up this entire development environment. And they would create a development environment and go into it, at which point they can create a new library, like the checkout flow, the shared piece of code they want, in addition to their native apps. And then they would edit the dependencies of the apps such that they point to the new library they created. And then here's the fun part. At this point, they should be able to start their application, and not only would it be running their application, but also it would run all their dependencies and link them together. So this is where the magic really, really belongs. So this is what they were hoping to build. But this doesn't quite work yet. We're sort of hopeful that this is where we can go, because we'd really like to be able to easily develop several modules at once. So we're actually going to need your help. This is a very complicated issue. So they gave me this repo. I put it up this morning. Maybe we can all go and complain about the dependencies issues together on issues and pull requests, and we can iterate and hack our way to a nicer solution. So, gosh, I've been talking about dependency messes and code sharing for the past couple of minutes. Whatever happened to our really exciting team of hackers, right? They're just trying to iterate their way out of this problem. Well, they also wanted to make a web app. And sharing code between React Native and React Web is something we've really wanted to do for a long time. The idea of universal components, I mean, this is kind of the dream, right? Our team has built this really great native app, So theoretically, shouldn't this be able to run on native web? Sorry, on mobile web, because this is, it's a mobile application? Well, unfortunately, we're not quite there, even though React Native Web goes a long way in the right direction. And it turns out that the biggest problem is that we're deep, deep in dependency hell. If you want to give this a try, I highly recommend it in this hacky workspace environment. And maybe you can help us iterate to the right place where we actually can use universal components. But we're still facing a number of issues in this department. All right, but it turns out navigation isn't the blocker, and navigation code is ready to share between mobile and web. So let's assume for a second that we do have universal components. Let's take a look at how we would render our React navigation app on the server, right? We would pull out the router, which has all of our navigation logic. And in server rendering land, we've got a request to serve. So we've got path and params that are coming in from the request. So what we can do is we can use our router to get the navigation action that we're going to want to send, that we're going to want to handle for this path and params. Now, it's possible that the navigation action is empty because the path and params were malformed. So we're going to need to prepare a backup state in the case where the navigation action is missing. But if there is a navigation action, we can run getStateForAction on our router. And finally, we've got our navigation state. It's ready to go. We can prepare our navigation prop with a navigation state. And because this is server rendering, we don't quite care about handling the dispatch of more navigation actions. We're just going to let those waste away. But now we've got our navigation prop, and we can render our application just as we would otherwise. Pretty straightforward. So like I said, it's not working with shared components, but there is a working example. ReactNavigation.org works on this way. And it also uses React Navigation on the browser. So if you're curious about the source code for how you can use React Navigation on the web, you can take a peek at the source code for this website at the React Navigation repo/website. Cool. So now let's get back to our swag story for real. This is pretty exciting. We've got one more chapter, and boy, is it a good one. So let's see what they did. They managed to hack together some super broken workspace where they wanted to create an application like this. Right? They have the swag store experience, and you'd be able to open the checkout flow from it. So they tried creating some native apps inside of their workspace, one for the original just checkout flow, and one for the new swag store, more holistic experience. Now, they wanted to create a library for their shared code. And inside that library, they're basically just exporting the routes that we had configured earlier. So that cart route actually has the entire navigator that we had built earlier, that fully customized navigator. All right, so we're exporting the navigation routes from the library. Now what we want to do is we want to add the library to the native applications, just by editing the package.json. And then we can start one of the applications. In this case, let's develop the swag store. So again, this is just a pretty straightforward app navigator, right? A stack navigator with a bunch of different things on top of each other. And the first thing that's going to be in there is our browsing experience. It's going to be the lowest thing in the stack. But then we also want to be able to link to various things inside of the checkout flow. So we're going to splat in all of our checkout routes such that we can navigate to them. OK, then how are we actually going to link to those things, right? Well, say we have a button that's like add to cart. Well, what we can do is we can navigate to the checkout cart at this moment. Right, and this route, you'll notice we didn't directly specify this route, but because this route is available in the other navigator, we're able to navigate to it from here. Cool. So now we've got this sort of deeply nested application, right? And the cool thing is we've managed to isolate the full checkout experience into its own module. So what our team figured out is they realized that they would be able to refactor their code a little bit, publish this to NPM, and now anybody would be able to drop in their swag experience because they're not the only ones selling swag. It turns out a lot more companies would be selling swag in their mobile apps if it was as easy as putting in a button and NPM installing it. So they pioneered an entire new type of business without even realizing it. Swag as a service. Now, it's not the SaaS that their investors had originally believed in, but boy, did it succeed. Because now applications everywhere are installing this swag checkout flow. So I find this really exciting because now we can build these applications and share them with the whole world, and people will be able to drop them into their applications. So now we'll be able to build so much faster than we were ever before. Right now, we're mostly sharing code on React Native, but one day, we're going to be able to share code with web as well. So there's a few things that you can try out here. So you might have realized that this example is pretty fictitious, but the navigation code and the workspace hacks are not. So you can check it out on GitHub right here. And you can experiment with a workspace on the workspace repo. Most likely, it's not going to work for you. But if you complain about the right things and help us fix all the problems, then we might have a really awesome development environment for the whole JavaScript community. Wouldn't that be awesome? Seriously, I want you guys to help, like you especially. OK. All right. So lastly, I highly recommend React Navigation. It's what allowed our team to very quickly add navigation capabilities into their app, and then eventually customize the navigation views, the navigation behavior, and then embed that application, not just on the app stores, but embed that application into other applications around the world. So lastly, I just want to thank you guys for being a part of this awesome and ever-expanding community. Go build some awesome stuff.